The phone rang at 2:17 in the morning, shattering the silence that had become my closest companion over the past 7 years. I remember the exact time because I was already awake lying in the darkness, with Arthur's steady breathing beside me, counting the minutes until dawn would give me permission to rise and face another hollow day. My hand trembled as I reached for the receiver, some primitive instinct warning me that this call would cleave my life into before and after. "Hello," my voice came out hoarse, unused to speaking at this hour. There was a pause, then a small voice surprisingly steady for its size. "Is this Eleanor Vance?" "Yes," my heart began to hammer against my ribs. "My name is Evan. I'm your grandson. I'm calling from the Delaware Children's Home. Please come get me." The room tilted. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. Arthur stirred beside me, sensing my distress, even in sleep. "What did you say?" "I'm Evan. I'm 7 years old. My mom told me about you before she left. She said if anything ever happened, I should call you. Please, I've been waiting." The line went dead. I sat frozen, the dial tone drilling into my ear like an accusation. My mind struggled to process what I had just heard, to make sense of words that should have been impossible. Arthur was fully awake now, sitting up and switching on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with harsh yellow light that made my eyes water. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" who was on the phone. His voice carried that edge of panic I had heard so often in the months after we lost Sophia, the sound of a man bracing himself for more bad news. "A boy." The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign and dangerous. "He said his name is Evan. He says he's our grandson." The color drained from Arthur's face, leaving him looking older than his 68 years. He reached for his reading glasses on the nightstand, a habitual gesture, even though there was nothing to read, nothing to make sense of. "That's not possible. Sophia died 7 years ago. We buried her." But even as he spoke, I heard the hairline fracture in his certainty. We had buried someone, yes, but had we buried our daughter, the casket had been sealed, the remains too damaged for viewing. The identification had come from her wallet, her passport, and a DNA match from hair samples on her brush. At the time, drowning in grief so profound it felt like dying myself. I had not questioned any of it. The details had washed over me like white noise while I tried simply to keep breathing. "What if it wasn't her?" I whispered, giving voice to a thought so terrifying and so hopeful that it threatened to crack me open. "What if Sophia wasn't on that plane?" Arthur stood abruptly, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He began pacing the length of our bedroom, a room we had shared for 40 years, but which felt suddenly unfamiliar, transformed by this middle-of-the-night revelation into something strange and unsettling. "We can't do this to ourselves, Eleanor. We can't torture ourselves with impossible hopes. This is probably some kind of scam. Someone who knows about the Vance estate, someone who thinks they can exploit grieving parents. Grandparents." I corrected automatically, then realized what I had just said. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility and pain. Arthur stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw warring emotions playing across his face. Fear, hope, exhaustion, anger. Even if, and I mean if this boy exists, how do we know he's really related to us? How do we know this isn't exactly what I said? Someone trying to get access to the family money? His voice. I struggled to explain what I had felt in that brief moment on the phone. There was something about his voice, Arthur, something that reminded me of her. "Eleanor." Arthur's voice was gentle but firm, the tone he used when he thought I was being irrational, when my grief was clouding my judgment. "You can't possibly identify family resemblance in a voice over a phone line at 2 in the morning. You're hearing what you want to hear." The anger that flared up inside me was hot and immediate. "Don't patronize me. Don't act like I'm some hysterical woman hearing things. I know what I heard." "And what exactly did you hear?" A child's voice. There are thousands of 7-year-old boys in this country. The odds that this one happens to be our grandson are astronomical. "Then we investigate," I said, standing up and moving toward the closet. "We find out the truth. At 2:30 in the morning, Eleanor, be reasonable." Reasonable. I turned to face him, and I saw him flinch at whatever he saw in my expression. "Our daughter has been dead for 7 years. Dead, Arthur. I have lived with that loss every single day. It has been a weight around my neck, drowning me slowly. And now there's a chance, however small, that maybe she wasn't on that plane. That maybe somewhere out there's a piece of her still in this world. And you want me to be reasonable, Holko?" Arthur's shoulders sagged. "I just don't want to see you hurt again. When we lost Sophia, I thought I had lost you too. You were so deep in that depression, so far away from me. It took years to get you back, and even now, you're not the same. Neither of us are. I can't watch you fall apart again over false hope." His words hit me like cold water, dousing some of my anger. He was right, of course. The depression after Sophia's death had been all-consuming. I had spent 6 months barely leaving my bed, another year, barely leaving the house. I had stopped eating, stopped caring about anything. Arthur had tried everything, hiring therapists, doctors, even bringing in a nutritionist when I dropped to 105 pounds. Nothing had worked until gradually, incrementally, I had found a way to exist in a world without my daughter in it. But exist was all I had been doing. I had not been living. I had been going through the motions, a ghost haunting my own life. "I have to know," I said quietly. "Even if it turns out to be nothing, even if it's a scam or a mistake, I have to know. Can you understand that?" Arthur looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant he made his decision. The resistance left his body, replaced by a weary resignation. "All right, but we do this carefully. We call the police first thing in the morning. We have them verify that this place exists, that there's really a boy there making these claims. And if it checks out, we hire a lawyer before we do anything else. We protect ourselves legally." Agreed. I wanted to argue, wanted to get in the car immediately and drive through the night to Delaware, but I recognized the compromise he was offering. Arthur was a careful man, methodical and risk-averse. For him to agree to investigate it all was a significant concession. Agreed. Neither of us went back to sleep. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee we did not taste, watching the sky slowly lighten outside the window. At 6 o'clock, Arthur called the Delaware State Police non-emergency line and asked them to verify the existence of the Delaware Children's Home and whether they had a resident named Evan. The officer who took the call was polite but clearly thought we were wasting his time. He put us on hold for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. When he came back, his tone had changed. "Yes, sir, I can confirm that the Delaware Children's Home is a licensed facility in Wilmington. As for information about specific residents, you would need to contact the home directly or go through legal channels." It was something. It was not much, but it was something. The home existed. The boy might exist. At 7:30, Arthur called his attorney, a man named Richard Blackwood, who handled the Vance family's estate and business affairs. Blackwood listened to our story and then recommended someone else. "You need a family law specialist," Blackwood said. "Someone who handles custody issues and child welfare cases. I can give you a name. Jonathan Davies. He's tough, he's smart, and he doesn't lose often." By 9 o'clock, we were sitting in Jonathan Davies' office in downtown Philadelphia, a space that smelled of old leather and older money. Davies himself was in his late 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see through whatever facade you presented. He listened to our story without interrupting, making occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Let me make sure I understand. 7 years ago, your daughter Sophia died in a plane crash. Or rather, you were told she died in a plane crash. Positive identification was made through personal effects and DNA analysis. You held a funeral. And now, out of the blue, you receive a phone call from a child claiming to be your grandson." "Yes," Arthur said. "And you want to pursue this. Even though it could be a scam, even though it could be emotionally devastating if it turns out to be false, even though it means reopening wounds that have barely started to heal." "Yes," I said firmly. Davies nodded slowly. "All right, here's what we're dealing with. First, we need to verify that this child exists and that he actually made the call. That's step 1. Second, if he does exist, we need to establish your legal standing to even request information about him. You can't just walk into a children's home and demand to see a resident. There are privacy laws, protection protocols." "How do we establish standing?" Arthur asked. "We need to present evidence that there's a reasonable possibility of a familial relationship. That's going to be tricky given that your daughter is legally deceased. We'll need to challenge the original identification, which means reopening the investigation into the plane crash. Are you prepared for that?" I had not thought about that aspect. Challenging Sophia's death would mean questions, investigations, possibly even accusations that we were trying to commit some kind of fraud. It would mean publicity, media attention, people talking about the Vance family's private tragedy. But weighed against the possibility of finding my grandson, it seemed a small price to pay. "Whatever it takes," I said. "Good. Then here's my advice. We hire a private investigator to look into this. Someone good, someone with experience in missing persons and cold cases. They can verify the existence of this Evan, try to find out his background, and see if there's any connection to Sophia. Depending on what they find, we move forward from there. Can you recommend someone? Arthur asked. I can do better than that. I can make a call right now. Davies picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Marcus, it's Jonathan Davies. I have a case for you. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Excellent. 2:00. When he hung up, he looked at us. Marcus Miller, former Philadelphia PD detective, 25 years on the force before he went private. He's expensive, but he's worth every penny. He specializes in cases that have gone cold or hit dead ends. If there's anything to find, Marcus will find it. We spent the rest of the morning in a strange limbo, too keyed up to eat, too restless to sit still. At 2:00 sharp, Marcus Miller walked into Davies's office. He was tall and rangy, with the weathered face of someone who had seen more than his share of human misery, but had not let it make him cynical. His handshake was firm, his eyes direct. Davies laid out the basics of our situation. Miller listened without taking notes, which I found disconcerting until I realized he was the kind of person who remembered everything. When Davies finished, Miller turned to us. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I can't help you if you're hiding things or trying to make your daughter look better than she was. I need the truth, all of it. Understood. We both nodded. Tell me about Sophia, not the obituary version, the real version. Arthur and I looked at each other. We had spent 7 years carefully curating our memories of Sophia, sanding down the rough edges, turning her into something close to a saint in our recollections. It felt like betrayal to speak honestly about her flaws. But Miller was waiting, and I could see he would not settle for platitudes. She was strong-willed, I began slowly. Even as a child, she knew what she wanted and she went after it. She was brilliant, tested in the top 1% nationally. She was also stubborn sometimes, to the point of self-destruction. When she decided something, nothing could change her mind. She and I clashed, Arthur admitted. Constantly, especially during her teenage years. I wanted her to follow a certain path to live up to the Vance family legacy. She wanted to make her own choices. Tell me about her disappearance, Miller said, before the plane crash. This was the part I hated most, the part that kept me awake at night with guilt and regret. She fell in love. His name was Caleb Thorne. We didn't approve. Why not? He wasn't suitable, Arthur said stiffly. He came from nothing, had no prospects, no education. Sophia could have had anyone, but she chose him. We forbade her from seeing him. I continued, forcing myself to be honest. We told her that if she continued the relationship, we would cut her off financially, remove her from the will. We thought we were protecting her. And she left, Miller said. It was not a question. She told us she was going to marry him with or without our blessing. Arthur threatened to have Caleb arrested if he came near her again. I said things I can never take back. I told her she was throwing her life away, that she was being stupid and selfish. And she looked at me with such hatred and said, I never really loved her. I only loved who I wanted her to be. My voice broke on the last words. Even 7 years later, the memory of that final conversation could bring me to tears. She left that night, Arthur said, picking up the thread. Left a note saying she never wanted to see us again. We tried to find her. Hired investigators, filed missing person reports, alerted the credit card companies. Nothing. It was like she vanished into thin air. For 2 years, we heard nothing, I said. And then the police came to tell us she had died in a plane crash. Tell me about the identification process, Miller said. Arthur pulled out a folder he had brought with him, containing all the documentation from the crash investigation. Miller went through it carefully, his expression neutral. DNA match was based on hair samples from her brush, Miller noted. No dental records comparison. She had perfect teeth, I said. Never needed any major dental work. And the body was too badly burned for visual identification. Miller continued reading, occasionally making a note on the small pad he had pulled from his jacket pocket. Finally, he looked up. All right, here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to verify the existence of this boy, Evan, and find out everything I can about him. How he came to be at the home, what his story is, whether there's any documentation about his parents. Second, I'm going to take a fresh look at this plane crash investigation. 7 years is a long time, but I still have contacts in the state police. If there are any holes in the original investigation, I'll find them. How long will this take? I asked. Depends on what I find. Could be a week, could be a month. I'll update you regularly. He stood and shook our hands again. I'll warn you now. Prepare yourselves for disappointment. The odds that this boy is actually your grandson are not great, but I'll do my best to find out the truth either way. After he left, Davies walked us to the door. Go home. Try to maintain your normal routine as much as possible. Don't talk to anyone about this. Not friends, not family, no one. If word gets out that you're investigating your daughter's death and looking for a possible grandchild, you'll have every con artist in the tri-state area showing up with sob stories. Understood. We drove home in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. When we pulled into the driveway, I looked at the house we had lived in for 30 years, the house Sophia had grown up in, and it felt different somehow, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. That night, unable to sleep again, I found myself walking the hallways like a ghost. I ended up in Sophia's old room, which I had kept exactly as she left it. Her bed was still made with the same quilt her desk still held. Her high school textbooks, her walls were still covered with posters of bands she had loved and photographs of friends whose names I had forgotten. I sat on her bed and let myself remember, not the sanitized memories I usually allowed, but the real ones. Sophia at 15, slamming her bedroom door so hard the pictures rattled on the walls downstairs. Sophia at 16, sneaking out to go to a concert we had forbidden her to attend. Sophia at 17, bringing home a boyfriend we had not approved of and defiantly kissing him goodbye on our front porch where the neighbors could see. She had been difficult. She had been defiant. She had been everything we had not wanted her to be. And we had tried to reshape her into our image of the perfect Vance daughter. No wonder she had left. No wonder she had chosen a life with Caleb over a life with us. The guilt that washed over me was so intense I had to grip the edge of the bed to keep from falling over. We had driven her away. Our need to control our obsession with appearances and family legacy, our inability to simply love her as she was. We had pushed and pushed until she snapped. And if she had died in that plane crash, our last words to each other had been said in anger and disappointment. I had never gotten the chance to tell her I was sorry that I loved her, regardless of her choices, that I would take it all back if I could. But what if she had not died? What if somewhere, somehow, she had survived and started a new life? And what if she had a son? I pulled out my phone and looked at the photograph I had taken of Sophia's room years ago, before I had stopped being able to enter it without breaking down. In the picture, Sophia was 17, laughing at something off camera, her whole face lit up with joy. I studied her features, trying to imagine what a child of hers would look like, trying to picture this Evan who claimed to be my grandson. The next week was the longest of my life. Every day I waited for the phone to ring for Miller to call with an update. Arthur tried to distract me with errands and social obligations, but I moved through them like a sleepwalker, present in body but absent in mind. Finally, 8 days after our meeting with Miller, he called and asked us to come to Davies' office. His tone gave nothing away, but the fact that he wanted to meet in person, rather than simply report over the phone, told me he had found something significant. We drove to Philadelphia in tense silence. In Davies' conference room, Miller had spread out a collection of documents and photographs. He waited until we were seated before beginning. I'll start with what I found about Evan Hork, he said. The Delaware Children's Home confirmed they have a resident by that name. He's 7 years old, admitted to the facility 6 months ago after being found wandering alone near a bus station in Wilmington. He had no identification, no record of his parents or guardians. The only information they could get from him was his first name and the name Eleanor Vance. My breath caught. He knew my name. According to the intake workers, he insisted that he had a grandmother named Eleanor Vance in Pennsylvania. He provided no other details about family, no last name for himself, no information about his mother beyond the fact that she had told him to call you if he ever needed help. Did you see him? I asked. Did you get a photograph? Miller pulled out a picture and slid it across the table. It was a standard institutional photograph, the kind taken for identification purposes, but it was enough. The boy in the picture was small for 7, with serious dark eyes and hair that needed cutting. But it was his features that made my heart stop. The shape of his face, the set of his jaw, the way his ears curved. He looks like her, Arthur said, his voice rough. My God, he looks just like Sophia at that age. Resemblance is not proof of relationship, Miller cautioned. But I'll admit, when I saw him in person, the family similarity was striking. I was able to arrange a brief meeting with him under the guise of being a social worker reviewing his case. You met him? I leaned forward eagerly. What was he like? Smart, very smart. Articulate beyond his years. Also scared and clearly traumatized by whatever happened to him. He didn't want to talk much about his past, but he kept asking me if I knew you, if I could help him contact you. I felt tears welling up and fought them back. What else? I asked him about his mother. He said her name was Sophie, though he wasn't sure if that was her real name. He said they moved around a lot, that she worked different jobs, that sometimes things were good, and sometimes they barely had enough to eat. He said she loved him very much, but that she was always sad and scared. Why did she leave him at the home? Arthur asked. He doesn't know. He says they took a bus to Wilmington together, that she told him to wait at the station while she ran an errand and she never came back. He waited for 2 days before someone found him and called the authorities. The picture Miller painted was heartbreaking. A child abandoned, scared alone, waiting for a mother who never returned. And through it all, he had remembered the name. Eleanor Vance had held onto it like a lifeline. Now for the plane crash investigation. Miller continued, pulling out another folder. This is where things get interesting. I pulled the original case file and went through it with someone I know who specializes in aviation disasters. There are some irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Davies asked. The DNA identification was based entirely on hair samples from a brush found in Sophia's apartment. No other biological samples were available for comparison. The body recovered from the crash was too badly damaged for fingerprint analysis, and as you mentioned, there were no dental records to compare. So the identification could be wrong, I said. It's possible, but there's more. I did some digging into the other passengers on that flight. One of them was a woman named Veronica Hayes. She had a criminal record, multiple convictions for identity theft, forgery, and fraud. She was wanted in 3 states at the time of the crash. Arthur frowned. What does that have to do with Sophia? I'm getting to that. Veronica Hayes was carrying identification in the name of Sophia Vance. Your daughter's driver's license, her credit cards, her passport. The assumption was that Sophia was using her own ID, obviously. But what if it was the other way around? What if Veronica Hayes had stolen Sophia's identity and was traveling under her name? The room seemed to tilt. Are you saying Sophia wasn't on that plane? I'm saying it's a possibility we need to investigate further. The DNA match could have been flawed. Hair analysis is not as definitive as blood or tissue samples. And if Veronica Hayes was carrying Sophia's ID, the initial identification would have been based on those documents. But why would this Veronica have Sophia's identification? Davies asked. Miller pulled out another document. That's the million-dollar question. I've been trying to reconstruct Sophia's movements in the 2 years between when she left home and when the crash occurred. It's been difficult because she was clearly trying to stay off the grid, but I found some traces. She was living in Baltimore under her own name for a while, working waitressing jobs, living in a cheap apartment. Then about 8 months before the crash, she disappears again. No credit card activity, no employment records, nothing. That's when she met Veronica, I said slowly, the pieces starting to come together. That's my theory. I think Sophia got into some kind of trouble, needed help, and Veronica saw an opportunity. She had a record of preying on vulnerable people, especially young women. She would befriend them, gain their trust, and then steal their identities. So Veronica stole Sophia's identity and died in the plane crash, Arthur said. But where's Sophia? That's what I'm still trying to find out. But there's one more piece of information that might help. Miller pulled out a folded piece of paper. I went back to the children's home and spoke to some of the staff more extensively. One of them, a man named Robert Davies, who retired last year, remembered something. About a month after Evan was admitted, a letter arrived addressed to him. It had been incorrectly addressed and returned to sender, but Davies had kept it thinking it might be important someday. He handed me the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, even though I had not seen it in years. Sophia's careful, precise script, the same she had used to write her high school essays and college applications. With shaking hands, I unfolded the letter and began to read. Mom and Dad, I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to send this. I've started it a dozen times and stopped. I want you to know that I'm alive. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for the things I said, for the way I left, for the years of silence. After I left, I tried to make it work with Caleb. We were happy at first, or I thought we were. But Caleb had problems I didn't see until it was too late. He got involved with the wrong people, started dealing drugs to make money. I begged him to stop, threatened to leave, but he said we needed the income. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would change things. I thought becoming a father would make him see reason. Instead, it made things worse. He got reckless, took bigger risks. 3 months before Evan was born, he got arrested. They gave him 15 years. I was alone, broke, pregnant, terrified. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling you 1,000 times, but I was too ashamed, too proud. I told myself I had made this mess, and I had to fix it on my own. Evan was born on March 15th. He's beautiful, Mom. He has your eyes and Dad's chin. He's the best thing I've ever done, the only thing I've gotten right. But it's been so hard. I've been working 3 jobs just to keep us fed and housed. I'm exhausted all the time. I'm scared all the time. I'm scared I'm not good enough for him, that I'm failing him the way I failed you. 6 months ago, I made a terrible mistake. I was desperate for money, desperate for a way out, and I met someone who seemed to offer a solution. Her name was Veronica. She seemed kind at first, understanding. She said she could help me get a fresh start, that she knew people who could set me up with a new identity, a better job, a chance to start over. I was stupid. I trusted her. I gave her my ID, my social security card, all my documents. She said she needed them to process paperwork for the new identity. By the time I realized she had no intention of giving them back, she was gone. Then I saw the news about the plane crash. I saw my name on the passenger list. I saw that they were identifying me as one of the victims. And I panicked, Mom. I panicked because I realized what had happened. Veronica had been using my identity. She had died pretending to be me. And I thought about it. I thought about how you and Dad probably thought I was dead. I thought about how you had probably buried me, mourned me, moved on. And I thought maybe it was better that way. Maybe it was better if you remembered me as I was before everything went wrong, before I disappointed you so badly. But then I realized I was being selfish again. Because even if I could live with that decision, Evan deserved better. He deserved to know his family. He deserved to grow up with people who could give him the life I can't. So I'm writing this letter even though I don't know if I'll send it. I'm writing to tell you that I'm alive, that you have a grandson, and that I'm so sorry for everything. If you're reading this, it means I found the courage to reach out. It means I'm ready to face whatever consequences come from my choices. It means I'm ready to come home if you'll have me. I love you both. I've always loved you, even when I said I didn't. Even when I was angry and hurt and stupid. I love you, and I'm sorry. Sophia. The letter ended there, unfinished, as if she had been interrupted mid-thought or lost her nerve. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face before I could even begin to process what it meant. She's alive, I whispered. My baby is alive. Arthur was crying too. Something I had seen him do maybe twice in our entire marriage. He reached for my hand and gripped it so tightly it hurt, but I didn't care. Where is she? Arthur asked Miller. Can you find her? Miller's expression was cautious. That's going to be harder. The letter was written over 6 months ago, and clearly it was never sent. Whatever Sophia's plans were, then they may have changed. But I have a lead I'm pursuing. What lead? I demanded. The letter mentions Caleb getting arrested. I've been trying to track him down. If Sophia stayed in contact with him, he might know where she is now. Find him, Arthur said. Whatever it costs, however long it takes, find him. Over the next 2 weeks, Miller worked his contacts and followed leads while Davies began the legal process of requesting supervised visitation with Evan. The facility initially resisted, citing privacy concerns and the lack of established relationship, but Davies was relentless. He filed motions, submitted evidence of potential familial connection, and argued that it was in the child's best interest to at least explore the possibility. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we received approval for a 1-hour supervised visit at a neutral location. The day of the meeting, I changed clothes 4 times, unable to decide what a grandmother should wear when meeting her grandson for the first time. I settled on a simple blue dress and a string of pearls, then immediately worried I looked too formal, too intimidating. Arthur was equally nervous, though he tried to hide it. We drove to the designated meeting place, a small public park in Wilmington, in near silence. A social worker met us there, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, who made it clear she would be watching our every interaction. He's very protective of himself, she warned us. Don't be surprised if he's standoffish at first. He's been disappointed before. Then I saw him. He was smaller than I expected, wearing clothes that were clean, but clearly secondhand. His hair neatly combed, but in need of a trim. He walked toward us slowly, holding the social worker's hand, his dark eyes watching us warily. When we were about 10 feet apart, he stopped. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I tried to memorize every detail of his face, the curve of his cheek, the shape of his nose, the way his eyebrows drew together when he was thinking. Evan, I said softly, taking a tentative step forward. His lower lip trembled. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart, I'm your grandma. He broke free from the social worker's hand and ran to me, throwing his small arms around my waist. With such force, he nearly knocked me over. I dropped to my knees and held him, this child I had never met, but who felt as familiar as breathing, and I felt something inside me that had been broken begin to heal. Arthur knelt beside us, his hand on Evan's back, and the three of us stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the social worker watched with a slightly softer expression. When we finally pulled apart, Evan looked up at me with tears on his cheeks. "I was scared you wouldn't come. I was scared I got the name wrong or that you didn't want me." "Oh, baby," I cupped his face in my hands. "We've been looking for you. We didn't know you existed, but now that we do, we're never going to let you go. I promise." We spent the next hour sitting on a park bench talking. Evan told us about his life in bits and pieces, carefully edited for a child who had learned not to reveal too much. He talked about his mother in present tense, as if she might come back any moment, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that we didn't know where she was. He asked about our house, about his mother when she was young, about whether we had any pets. Arthur promised to teach him to fish if he came to stay with us. I promised to teach him to bake cookies. Evan listened with such hopeful intensity that it broke my heart. When the hour ended and we had to leave, Evan clung to me again. "You'll come back, right? You promise." "Every day," I said. "Every single day until we can take you home." And I kept that promise. For the next 3 weeks, Arthur and I made the drive to Delaware daily. We brought games, books, small treats that the social worker had to approve. We learned about Evan's fears and dreams, his likes and dislikes, the small details that make up a life. He was afraid of loud noises, would flinch at sudden movements. He had nightmares almost every night. He hoarded food, hiding snacks in his pillowcase because he wasn't sure when the next meal would come. He was brilliant reading at a 5th grade level, despite inconsistent schooling. He remembered everything, could recite conversations verbatim. The more time I spent with him, the more convinced I became that he was Sophia's son. It wasn't just his physical resemblance, though, that was striking. It was the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, exactly like Sophia used to. The way he bit his lower lip when he was nervous. The way he laughed, a bright sound that came from deep in his belly, the same laugh that used to fill our house before everything fell apart. Arthur saw it too. My husband, who had been so skeptical at first, so sure this was a scam, was completely won over. I watched him soften in ways I hadn't seen in years, teaching Evan to play chess with a patience he had never shown our own daughter, listening to his stories with genuine interest, instead of the distracted half attention he used to give Sophia when she was young. "We failed her," Arthur said to me one night as we drove home from another visit. "We were so focused on who we wanted her to be that we never really saw who she was. We're not going to make that mistake with Evan." It was the closest Arthur had ever come to admitting our culpability in driving Sophia away, and I reached over to squeeze his hand. "No, we won't." Meanwhile, Miller continued his investigation. He had tracked down Caleb Thorne to a halfway house in Ohio. Caleb had been released from prison 18 months earlier on good behavior, had been trying to rebuild his life with construction work and regular meetings with his parole officer. Miller arranged for us to meet him, though Davies strongly advised against it. "Let Miller handle it," Davies said. "You don't need to put yourself through this." But I insisted. I needed to look Caleb in the eye, this man who had taken my daughter away from me, who had gotten her pregnant and then gone to prison and left her alone. I needed to see for myself what Sophia had seen in him, why she had thrown everything away for him. We met at a diner in a small Ohio town, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner for hours. Caleb was already there when we arrived, sitting in a corner booth, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. He looked older than I expected, worn down by hard living and harder choices, but I could see what Sophia might have seen once. He had kind eyes, and when he stood to shake our hands, his grip was firm but gentle. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," he said quietly, "I appreciate you meeting with me. I wasn't sure you would." We sat down across from him. Arthur's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but I'm sure my hostility showed. "I loved your daughter," Caleb said before either of us could speak. "I know you don't believe that. I know you think I was some lowlife who corrupted her or used her or whatever story you've told yourselves. But I loved her. She was the best thing that ever happened to me." "You got her pregnant and then went to prison," Arthur said coldly. "That's a funny way of showing love." Caleb flinched but didn't look away. "You're right, I made terrible choices. I got involved in things I shouldn't have, thought I could make easy money to give Sophia a better life. Instead, I destroyed everything. I take full responsibility for that." "Where is she?" I asked, unable to contain myself any longer. "Where is Sophia?" "I don't know." Caleb's voice was thick with emotion. "I wish I did. When I got arrested, she tried to wait for me. She came to see me in prison once, told me she was pregnant, told me she was going to have the baby and raise it on her own. I begged her to go back to you to let you help her, but she refused. She was so angry at you both, so hurt. What did she say about us? I asked. Caleb hesitated, clearly not wanting to cause more pain, but I leaned forward. Please, I need to know. She said you never accepted her for who she was, that everything had to be your way, or it was wrong, that you loved the idea of your perfect daughter more than you loved the real her. He looked down at his coffee. She said she spent her whole life trying to live up to impossible expectations and she was tired of failing. The words hit like physical blows. Arthur made a choked sound beside me, and I felt tears burning in my eyes, because Caleb was right. That was exactly what we had done. After that visit, I never saw her again, Caleb continued. I wrote her letters, but they came back marked return to sender. I tried to keep tabs on her through friends, but she seemed to have disappeared. Then I heard about the plane crash. I thought she was dead. When I got out of prison, I tried to find out more, but there was nothing. No grave to visit, no records I could access. I thought I had lost her forever. Tell us about Veronica Hayes, Miller said, speaking for the first time. How did Sophia know her? Caleb's face darkened. Veronica, God, I wish Sophia had never met that woman. Veronica was bad news, a con artist who preyed on vulnerable people. She met Sophia at a diner where Sophia was working, befriended her, offered to help. I tried to warn Sophia about her from prison, but by then it was too late. What did Veronica want from her? I asked. At first, I think she just wanted Sophia's identity. Veronica was wanted by the police, needed to disappear. She convinced Sophia that they could help each other. She would give Sophia money and connections for a fresh start if Sophia would let her borrow her ID temporarily. Sophia was desperate enough to agree. And then Veronica died in the plane crash, Arthur said. I didn't know that until recently, Caleb said. When Miller contacted me and told me what he had discovered, it all started to make sense. Sophia must have seen the news about the crash, realized what happened, and panicked. Why would she panic? I asked. She wasn't responsible for Veronica's death. No, but she gave Veronica her ID. She could be seen as an accomplice to identity theft, maybe even to whatever crimes Veronica was running from. And Sophia had Evan to think about. If she came forward and admitted the truth, she risked losing him to the system. Better to stay hidden, to let everyone think she was dead. The picture Caleb painted made a terrible kind of sense. Sophia scared and alone, making desperate choices that spiraled out of control. It sounded exactly like something our stubborn, proud daughter would do, convinced she could handle everything on her own, rather than admit she needed help. Do you have any idea where she might have gone? Miller asked. Caleb thought for a long moment. There was a place she talked about sometimes, a little town in Montana where she went on a summer trip in high school. She said it was the most peaceful place she had ever been, that someday she wanted to go back there. Silver Creek, I think it was called. Miller made a note. That's something. It's more than we had. If you find her, Caleb said, looking at me with desperate intensity, tell her I'm sorry, tell her I got clean, I'm working steady, I'm trying to be the man she deserved, and tell her if there's any way I can make things right, I will. We left that meeting with more questions than answers, but at least we had a possible lead. Miller began investigating Silver Creek, Montana, while Davies pushed forward with the custody proceedings for Evan. That's when things got complicated. 2 days after our meeting with Caleb, we received notification that another family had filed a petition to adopt Evan. The Fosters. Christine and David Foster were exactly the kind of people who usually got their way. Christine came from old Philadelphia money. David was a successful venture capitalist, and between them, they had enough connections to make things happen. They were also childless after years of trying and multiple failed fertility treatments, and they had apparently decided that Evan was the answer to their prayers. Why him? I asked Davies when he delivered the news. There are thousands of children in the system. Why are they so fixated on Evan? Davies looked uncomfortable. I did some digging. Christine Foster is on the board of several charities, including one that supports the Delaware Children's Home. She's been a major donor for years. She met Evan during one of her visits and apparently became attached to him. How convenient, Arthur said bitterly. And I'm sure her donations had nothing to do with the home's willingness to entertain her adoption petition. I can't prove anything, Davies said. But I share your suspicions. Regardless, we now have a fight on our hands. The Fosters have an excellent lawyer, substantial resources, and a compelling case. They're young, healthy, financially secure, and they've been through all the proper adoption training and home studies. And we're old, traumatized, and have no legal relationship to Evan, I said flatly. That's how they're going to frame it, Davies admitted. Our best chance is the DNA test. If we can prove biological relationship, we have a much stronger claim. The court has ordered testing for all parties. You, Arthur, and Evan will all need to provide samples. The DNA testing was done at a certified laboratory with strict chain of custody protocols. A technician swabbed the inside of my cheek, then Arthur's, then drove to Delaware to collect Evan's sample. We were told results would take 2 to 3 weeks. Those weeks were torture. The Foster's lawyer was already filing motions painting us as unstable, too old to care for an active 7-year-old, possibly delusional, in our belief that this child was our grandson. They brought up my hospitalization after Sophia's presumed death, the antidepressants I still took, the fact that I had barely left the house for a year. They brought up Arthur's absence during Sophia's childhood, his 70-hour work weeks, his emotional distance. They painted a picture of a couple who had already failed to raise one child successfully and shouldn't be given a chance to fail again. It was vicious and it was effective. I saw the doubt in people's eyes when the news stories started appearing. Elderly couple claims orphan is their grandson. Wealthy family battles for custody of mystery child. The media loved the story, and suddenly our private pain was public entertainment. The Fosters, meanwhile, were portrayed sympathetically. Childless couple who had spent years trying to start a family, who had devoted themselves to charity work, who simply wanted to give a needy child a loving home. They did interviews carefully crafted to show them in the best light. Christine teared up on camera talking about how she had felt an instant connection with Evan, how she knew he was meant to be their son. I wanted to scream every time I saw those interviews. That was my grandson, mine. She had no right to him. But doubt began to creep in. What if the DNA test came back negative? What if Evan wasn't actually related to us? What if this whole thing was just wishful thinking on my part? Seeing connections that weren't there because I so desperately wanted them to be real. Arthur sensed my spiraling anxiety and tried to reassure me. Whatever the test says, we're not giving up on him. Even if he's not biologically related, we can still fight for him. We have a relationship with him now. That counts for something. But we both knew it counted for very little in the eyes of the law, especially when pitted against a couple like the Fosters. The day the DNA results were due, I couldn't eat, couldn't sit still, could barely breathe. Davies called us to his office at 2 o'clock. When we arrived, his face was grave and my heart sank. I don't understand this, he said without preamble, sliding the laboratory report across his desk. The results came back. According to this, there is no genetic relationship between Evan and either of you. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. That's impossible. Look at him. He looks exactly like Sophia. I know, Davies said. Something doesn't add up here. The lab is one of the most reputable in the country. Their error rate is essentially 0. But I've seen enough to know when something smells wrong. Arthur was already on his feet, pacing like a caged animal. They tampered with it. The Fosters or someone working for them. They have to have. That's a serious accusation, Davies warned. One we can't make without proof. Then we get proof, Arthur said. We demand a retest. We hire our own expert to review the results. We don't give up. But the Fosters' lawyer moved fast. Within hours of the DNA results being released, they filed an emergency motion seeking to terminate our visitation with Evan, claiming we were delusional and potentially dangerous. They leaked the DNA results to the press, and suddenly we were not grieving grandparents trying to find family, but deranged old people trying to steal a child. The media turned on us. Social media was even worse. I made the mistake of reading the comments once and immediately regretted it. People called us grifters, said we were after the Vance estate money, speculated that we had mental health issues. Some were even crueler, suggesting that we had never gotten over our daughter's death and were now trying to replace her with some random child. The court suspended our visitation pending further review. When I called the children's home to try to talk to Evan, I was told I was no longer allowed any contact. I thought about the promise I had made him, that I would come every day, and I felt like I was breaking his heart all over again. I fell apart. The depression that had consumed me after Sophia's death came roaring back with a vengeance. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, spent my days crying in Sophia's old room. Arthur tried to hold things together, but I could see the toll it was taking on him too. Davies kept fighting, filing motion after motion, but without the DNA evidence, we had nothing. The Fosters were moving forward with their adoption petition, and there seemed to be nothing we could do to stop them. That's when Arthur did something I never expected. He hired Dr. Emily Carter, one of the country's leading forensic DNA experts, and paid her a substantial sum to review everything about our case. Not just the test results, but the entire chain of custody, the laboratory protocols, everything. Dr. Carter spent 2 weeks on her analysis. When she called us to her laboratory in Boston, her expression was a mixture of anger and vindication. Someone tampered with these samples, she said, laying out her findings. Look here. The labeling shows signs of alteration. The adhesive residue indicates the labels were removed and reapplied. And most damning, there are chemical markers in the samples that indicate contamination likely from deliberate mixing with other genetic material. Can you prove it? Davies asked. I can prove the samples were compromised, Dr. Carter said. I can show that proper chain of custody was not maintained. I can demonstrate that the results are scientifically unreliable. What I can't prove yet is who did it. But Miller could. While Dr. Carter was doing her analysis, Miller had been doing his own investigation. He followed the money-traced phone calls, interviewed laboratory staff, and he found the connection. Helen Stevens, the director of the Delaware Children's Home, had received $50,000 in deposits to an offshore account over the past 6 months. The deposits came from a shell corporation that, after considerable digging, Miller traced back to David Foster. When confronted with bank records and testimony from a laboratory technician who had witnessed Stevens having unusual access to the samples Stevens broke, she admitted that Christine Foster had approached her with a proposition. The Fosters desperately wanted Evan, but they knew they couldn't compete with biological relatives. If Stevens could ensure the DNA test failed, she would be set up with a comfortable retirement fund. Stevens had access to the samples during a brief window when they were being stored at the children's home before transport to the laboratory. She had switched Evan's sample with one from another child, one she knew had no relationship to us. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Stevens was arrested on charges of evidence tampering, fraud, and conspiracy. The Fosters were charged with bribery and obstruction of justice. Their carefully cultivated public image imploded overnight. David Foster resigned from his company. Christine was removed from every board she sat on. Their adoption petition was withdrawn. And we were granted an emergency motion for a new DNA test. This one conducted under the strictest possible protocols, with samples collected by independent parties, transported by bonded couriers, and analyzed at a laboratory selected by the court. The wait for these results was somehow worse than the first time, because now I knew how much could go wrong, how easily hope could be destroyed. But Arthur was my rock through it all. He held my hand through the sleepless nights, reassured me when the panic threatened to overwhelm me, never wavered in his belief that we would bring Evan home. When Davies called us to his office 3 weeks later, I could tell from his voice that the news was good. Still, I didn't let myself believe it until I saw the report with my own eyes. Probability of biological relationship between Eleanor Vance and Evan Thorne, 99.2%. I started crying and couldn't stop. Arthur held me while I sobbed, his own eyes wet with tears. We had our grandson. After all the pain and loss and years of grief, we had found a piece of Sophia that was still in this world. The custody hearing was almost anticlimactic after everything we had been through. With the DNA evidence and the scandal surrounding the Fosters' attempted manipulation, the court had little choice. We were granted full legal custody of Evan with adoption proceedings to follow. The day we brought him home was one of the best of my life. Evan walked through our front door carrying his small suitcase, looking around with wide eyes at the house that would now be his home. We had prepared Sophia's old room for him, repainting it a soft blue, buying new furniture, but keeping some of her things. Her bookshelf, her trophies, some of her favorite books. This was your mom's room, I told him, watching his face as he took it all in. When she was your age, and now it's yours. Evan set down his suitcase and walked slowly around the room, touching everything with a sense of wonder. He picked up one of Sophia's old stuffed animals, a worn teddy bear she had named Mr. Buttons. Can you tell me about her? He asked quietly. About my mom when she was little. So I did. Arthur and I spent that evening telling Evan stories about Sophia's childhood. Not the sanitized version we had told ourselves, but the real stories. About how she used to build elaborate forts out of couch cushions. About how she insisted on wearing her favorite dress for 3 weeks straight when she was 5. About how she had a terrible temper but also the kindest heart. About how she used to sneak downstairs after bedtime to steal cookies from the kitchen. About how she had once locked herself in the bathroom for 4 hours because she was angry at us for not letting her get a puppy. Evan listened to every word, hungry for these pieces of his mother, these glimpses of who she had been before life got hard and complicated. When he finally fell asleep in his new bed clutching Mr. Buttons, I stood in the doorway watching him, and felt something I had not felt in 7 years. Peace. But finding Evan had not answered all our questions. We still didn't know where Sophia was. Miller continued his investigation following Caleb's lead about Silver Creek, Montana. It took him 3 months of searching, of tracking down leads and interviewing people, and following paper trails of cash jobs and rental agreements under false names. Finally, he called us with news. He had found her. Sophia was living in Silver Creek under the name Sarah Mitchell, working at a diner called Rosie's that was open 24 hours a day. She worked the night shift 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., serving truckers and insomniacs, and people passing through on their way to somewhere else. She lived in a tiny apartment above a hardware store, kept to herself, had no friends that Miller could identify. She's been there for 8 months, Miller told us. Before that, she was in Wyoming. Before that, Idaho. She moves every few months, never stays anywhere long enough to put down roots. It's like she's running from something, but I can't figure out what. She's running from herself, I said quietly. From her guilt and her shame, and her belief that she doesn't deserve to be happy. We debated for days about what to do next. Arthur wanted to call first to give Sophia warning that we were coming. I wanted to simply show up, afraid that if we gave her notice she would run again. In the end, we compromised. Miller would approach her first, tell her that we knew where she was, and that we wanted to see her and gauge her reaction. Miller called her at the diner during a slow afternoon shift. According to him, she went completely white when he identified himself and said he was calling on behalf of Eleanor and Arthur Vance. She dropped the coffee pot she was holding, shattering it on the floor. She asked him how he had found her, and when he explained about Evan's phone call and everything that had happened since, she started crying. "Does he hate me?" she asked. "Evan, does he hate me for leaving him?" "Why don't you ask him yourself?" Miller said. "Your parents want to see you. They want you to come home." Sophia was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I can't face them after everything I've done." But Miller was persuasive. He told her about the DNA test, about the Fosters' attempts to steal Evan, about how Arthur and I had fought for him. He told her that Evan asked about her every day, that he missed her, that he needed to know she hadn't abandoned him because of something he did wrong. "He thinks it's his fault you left," Miller said. "He thinks he was too much trouble, too expensive, too difficult. He needs to hear from you that none of that is true." That's what broke through her resistance. The thought of Evan blaming himself. She agreed to let us visit, but she made one condition. She wanted to see Evan first alone before she saw us. She needed to explain to him, to apologize, to make sure he understood that leaving him had been about her failures, not his. We agreed, even though it nearly killed me to wait even longer. We arranged to fly to Montana with Evan, to stay at a hotel in the neighboring town, while Sophia and Evan had their reunion at the diner after it closed for its 1-hour cleaning break at 4 in the morning. The flight to Montana was tense. Evan was nervous and excited in equal measure. He asked 100 questions about his mother, about what she looked like now, about whether she would really be there, or whether this was some kind of trick. I did my best to reassure him, but I was asking myself the same questions. What if she didn't show up? What if she saw us and ran? What if the guilt and shame were too much and she couldn't face any of us? But when we arrived at Rosie's Diner at 4 a.m. on a cold Montana morning, she was there, standing outside the locked door, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill, looking terrified but determined. She looked so different from the girl I remembered, thinner, harder, with shadows under her eyes and premature gray in her dark hair. She wore a waitress uniform and sneakers with worn soles, and she looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. But when she saw Evan, her face transformed. All the hardness fell away, and she was simply a mother seeing her child again after too long apart. "Mom." Evan ran to her, and she dropped to her knees and caught him, holding him so tightly I was afraid she might hurt him. But Evan didn't seem to mind. He was crying and talking all at once, telling her about his new room and his new school and his grandparents and everything that had happened. Sophia was crying too, her face buried in Evan's hair, saying, "I'm sorry," over and over like a prayer or a penance. Arthur and I stayed back, giving them this moment. I watched my daughter hold her son and felt something in my chest crack open, years of grief and guilt and longing pouring out all at once. Finally, Sophia looked up and saw us standing there. Her eyes met mine, and I saw fear and shame and desperate hope all mixed together. "Mom," she whispered. "Dad, I'm so sorry for everything." I crossed the distance between us in 3 steps and pulled her into my arms. Evan still between us. Arthur joined us a moment later, his arms around all three of us, and we stood there in the parking lot of a diner in Montana at 4 a.m, holding each other and crying, while the first hints of dawn lightened the sky. "I'm sorry I wasn't on that plane," Sophia said, when we finally pulled apart, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry I let you think I was dead. I'm sorry for all the pain I caused." "You're alive," I said, cupping her face in my hands the way I used to when she was small. "That's all that matters. You're alive and you're here, and we're never letting you go again." We went inside the diner, and over terrible coffee and pretty good pie, Sophia told us everything. About meeting Veronica, about the identity theft, about seeing her own death reported on the news, and being too scared and ashamed to come forward. About trying to give Evan a life, about working 3 jobs, and moving constantly and never feeling safe. About finally realizing she couldn't do it anymore. That Evan deserved better than a mother who was always looking over her shoulder, always one step away from falling apart completely. "I thought if I brought him to you, if I made sure he was safe, then I could just disappear," Sophia said. "I thought it was better if he had you instead of me." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Evan said with the blunt honesty of a 7-year-old. "I don't want just them. I want you too. I want all of us together." Sophia looked at her son, and I saw the exact moment she decided to stop running. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll come home." It wasn't that simple, of course. Nothing ever is. Sophia had legal issues to deal with. The identity theft charges were dropped once the full story came out, but there were still complications. Davies worked his magic getting most of the charges dismissed or reduced, and Sophia ended up with community service and probation, but no jail time. The harder work was emotional. Sophia had to learn to forgive herself, which proved almost impossible. She had spent so many years believing she was a terrible mother, a terrible daughter, a terrible person, that she couldn't accept that we loved her despite her mistakes. She had nightmares about losing Evan again. She panicked every time he was out of her sight for more than a few minutes. She struggled with depression and anxiety, remnants of years of living in constant fear and stress. We all went to therapy individually and as a family. We talked about things we had buried for years, about my need to control Arthur's emotional distance, Sophia's desperate need for approval that had never been satisfied. We learned to communicate, really communicate, instead of talking past each other the way we always had. Evan had his own struggles. He had attachment issues from being abandoned, even though he understood intellectually why it had happened. He had nightmares about being sent back to the children's home. He hoarded food and toys, unable to trust that there would always be enough, that he was allowed to keep things. But slowly, painfully, we became a family. A real family this time, built on honesty and vulnerability, instead of expectations and appearances. Arthur retired from the business, deciding that he had spent enough years prioritizing work over family. He taught Evan to fish, to play chess, to fix things around the house. He and Sophia went on father-daughter lunches every week, slowly rebuilding a relationship that had always been strained. Sophia enrolled in community college, studying to become a social worker. She wanted to help other families navigate the system that had almost kept her from her son. She volunteered at a women's shelter, using her own experiences to help others in similar situations. I spent my days with Evan making up for lost time. We baked cookies and built blanket forts and read books together. I told him stories about his mother and his grandparents and the family history he was part of. I tried to give him the unconditional acceptance I had failed to give Sophia, to let him know that he was loved not for what he achieved, but simply for who he was. About a year after Sophia came home, Arthur made a proposal at dinner one evening. He had been thinking, he said, about the Vance family estate and what it was really for. "We have more money than we could ever spend," he said. "More than Evan will ever need. What's the point of it all if we don't use it to do some good?" He proposed establishing a foundation to help children in foster care and families trying to reunite. The foundation would provide legal assistance, fund DNA testing for disputed custody cases, offer support services for parents trying to regain custody of their children. We would call it the Evan Vance Foundation in honor of the grandson who had brought us all back together. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, that's perfect." We launched the foundation 6 months later at a ceremony attended by Davies Miller, Dr. Carter, and even Caleb, who had stayed in touch with Sophia and was slowly building a relationship with Evan. Sophia gave a speech about her own experiences about being lost and scared and thinking she had nowhere to turn. She talked about the importance of family, not just biological family, but chosen family. the people who show up and fight for you even when you've given them every reason not to. The foundation grew quickly, helping dozens of families in its first year. Sophia became its director, throwing herself into the work with the same intensity she had once brought to everything else. Arthur handled the business side, while I volunteered with the children, being a grandmother figure to kids who had no one else. It's been 3 years now since that phone call changed everything. 3 years since Evan's small voice on the line offered us a second chance we didn't deserve, but took anyway. 3 years of healing and rebuilding and learning how to be a family. Evan is 10, now thriving in school, and no longer the scared little boy who waited alone at a bus station for a mother who didn't come back. He's on the soccer team, has friends, occasionally gets in trouble for talking too much in class. He still has hard days, moments when the past catches up with him, but they're getting fewer and farther between. Sophia has rebuilt her life in ways I never imagined possible. She graduated from community college and is working on her bachelor's degree in social work. She has a small apartment a few miles from our house, her own space, but close enough that we see each other almost daily. She's dating someone, a kind man who works at the foundation and understands her past without being defined by it. She's learning to be happy again, slowly letting go of the guilt that has weighed on her for so long. Arthur and I are better than we've been in decades. We talk now, really talk about things that matter. We've learned to let go of control, to accept that we can't protect our family from everything, that sometimes love means stepping back and letting people make their own choices, even when we don't agree with them. Last week, Evan came home from school with an assignment. He had to write about his hero. I expected him to write about a sports figure or a historical figure. Instead, he wrote about Sophia. My mom is my hero. He read to us over dinner, his voice clear and proud. Because she made sure I was safe, even when it was hard. She made sure I found my family. And now we're all together, and that's the best thing in the world. We all cried, of course. We do that a lot now, this family of ours. But they're good tears, the kind that wash away old pain and make room for new joy. The Vance legacy isn't about money or prestige anymore. It's about this right here. A grandmother who answered a phone call. A grandfather who chose love over doubt. A mother who fought her way back to her child. And a brave little boy who refused to give up hope. This is our story. This is our family. And every day I'm grateful for the second chance we've been given, for the courage it took to forgive. For the strength it takes to love when love means being vulnerable. That phone call changed everything. It brought us back from the dead, all of us in different ways. And now, looking around this table at faces I love more than life itself, I know that no matter what else happens, we have what matters most. We have each other.